And I want to hear a huge thank you from everyone right now for U.S. Senator Chris Murphy, the author, the negotiator, the truth. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, as Liam said, I mean, I feel like this, bipartisan border security deal has been an incredible lifeline to Democrats in competitive seats all over the world. It's given them something to say on Republicans' best issue. You're from Connecticut, not necessarily, in the toughest races there. And so I'm curious, I mean, how did this come together? How did you come to be doing this kind of work?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to see everybody. Well, listen, there's certainly a political benefit to Democrats being able to talk about a solution on the border, but I mean, I would first argue that it is just good policy. The bipartisan border bill doesn't solve the entirety of what plagues the American immigration system. It is not an entire solution for the problems of the border, but it's the most significant bipartisan achievement on immigration reform and border security in a generation. Allows the president some flexibility to shut down the border when numbers have gotten too high, when crossings are beyond what you have the resources to control, a comprehensive reform of the asylum system, so it no longer takes 10 years for somebody to get an asylum claim adjudicated. We can now do it in weeks. Opens up more pathways for legal visa immigration to the United States. I mean, why did I work on it from Connecticut? Because it was a legitimate problem that needed to be solved. And my party, I think, had adopted a position coming out of the Trump administration, which was far too reflexive and far too defensive of the existing system. We can be immigration reformers too. We can be for border security. And I, wanted to test the proposition that Republicans actually wanted to solve the problem. They told us, right, about a year ago, we will only vote for Ukraine aid if you come to the table and do a bipartisan border deal with us, notwithstanding the fact that Donald Trump shows no interest in it. We did exactly what they asked. We came to a product that was a true bipartisan compromise, and they ran for the hills, which proved to the American public that Republicans are not sincere about fixing the border. They just want it to be a mess, and allowed us as Democrats to show that we are, in truth, the actual only party that is interested in solving the problem, and solving the problem in a way that does involve changing some laws to make enforcement at the border tougher and harder. I thought that was the right sort of policy place for our party to be, sort of stepping away from this defensive crouch that we had been in coming out of the Trump administration, but it was also the right political place for us to be. The Republicans handed us an unexpected gift in full retreat from attempting to solve the problem at all.
So illegal crossings are now down quite a bit this year after some executive orders from the president, some, I think, changes in Mexican policy as well, which I think is good, but it raises the question of, is this bill actually necessary, or does it turn out that once the president decided to take action, he was able to solve the problem?
So I think there's an outstanding question as to whether the president's executive action, which, by the way, is modeled on the language in the bill, will survive court challenge. So yes, I think the bill is still absolutely necessary because it's not 100% clear that the president has the statutory authorization to continue this policy at the border, and you cannot permanently rely on Mexico to engage in the kind of enforcement actions they are today. And nothing the president did actually solves one of the biggest underlying problems, which is the length of time it takes to process an asylum claim, which remains a lingering policy and political problem. It just doesn't strike Americans as fair that somebody comes to the United States with a less than 50% chance of getting a positive asylum claim, and they get to stay here for 5 to 10 years while that claim is being processed. If that continues to persist, it will continue to undermine Americans' faith in the immigration system, in the asylum system, in allowing anybody to come to this country to apply to be rescued from terror or torture. And so that still remains something that can only be done through statute.
So the vice president, who's now running for president, I'm sure people have heard about this, she's going to address this topic, and people are going to ask her why did the Biden-Harris administration wait so long to take these kind of actions. What do you think she should say to that?
Well, first, it's important to note that the administration did move forward pretty immediately with a new set of rules on how you'd process asylum claims at the border. Some of that went into effect. Some of it was, in fact, blocked by the courts. They requested Congress step in with a legislative remedy. Congress refused to do so. They asked Congress for additional resources year after year to help them better enforce the border. Republicans routinely stopped those funding increases. So the administration did take action, did make requests of Congress, requests that were all refused by and large by Republicans. But it is also important to note, as many have, that Kamala Harris was given a very discreet job, right? She was not put in charge of border policy. She was not put in charge of immigration policy. She was asked to oversee a program to reduce the root causes of migration from 3 countries. And in a 2-year period of time, from 2021, when she was given the job, to 2023, migration from the 3 countries that she was given primary responsibility for dropped by 50 to 60%. So if I'm the vice president, right, I will say, I was given a job inside the immigration portfolio. I did my job, and I did it pretty immediately. That's not to say that she's going to run away from the rest of the record, because as you mentioned today, crossings on a daily basis are lower than they were at the end of the Trump administration. You can run on that record. But I think she should highlight the work that she did, that she was in charge of, because she had great success. And it pierces a hole in the narrative that the Trump campaign is going to try to drive home.
So, as you noted, this arose legislatively originally out of a linkage to Ukraine aid. Republicans eventually got all the way to the other side and were like, we'll do the aid without the border bill. Right. So then I think when Democrats tried to bring this legislation back up as a standalone, a lot of more liberal members were against it, right? That the idea of taking asylum out of the context of a comprehensive reform was sort of anathema, even to people who would acknowledge that maybe the status quo isn't tenable. And I feel like in some ways that's become a big sticking point for Democrats, is not just the desire for kind of a path to citizenship, but the insistence that you can't address anything else on immigration unless you do everything.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'd contest a bit the premise of the question. There were a handful of additional Democrats that voted no when the bill came back before the Senate in a standalone fashion. But I think it was still 80 to 90% of the Democrats in the Senate voted for it, even when it was unattached to Ukraine aid. And I think that is in large part because the Democratic Party writ large now believes that border security as a standalone issue is a really important issue. When you can't have 10,000 people crossing a day, democratic cities have proven incapable of handling that number of people showing up on a daily or weekly basis. But here's the case that I make to my colleagues, right? Because I agree that there is, still a conventional wisdom in a big section of the Democratic Party that you shouldn't do any immigration reform unless it is that big, comprehensive package that we imagined 20 years ago, 10 years ago. I think that when your strategy has been failing for 20 years, you should admit that it has failed. I want a comprehensive immigration bill that includes a full pathway to citizenship, protection for the Dreamers, more border enforcement, a reform to our asylum system. But I have sat and watched that strategy not work. And so I am suggesting a different strategy, which is to prove to the American public that you are serious about border security, that you are serious about reforming the asylum system. And once they see that you have prioritized those 2 issues, they are going to be much more willing to be with you on doing the right thing for the people that are inside the country already. I admit that that's a chancy strategy. I'm not 100% sure that it will work, but I'm close to 100% sure that our current strategy of just waiting until all the stars align such that we can do it all together is not going to work.
And so, I mean, have you faced significant blowback? I mean, do you get angry constituents in your fairly liberal, fairly blue state, outraged that Chris Murphy has gone MAGA on the border?
So I certainly encounter people who disagree with the tactic, with the strategy, right? I mean, I hope I am sincere in explaining to people that I care just as much as anybody else, just as much as any full-time immigration advocate on creating a pathway to citizenship. I just believe that we need to change tactics and strategy. But when I'm in, a Democratic Party meeting in Connecticut, or when I was in those meetings when this was on the front pages as we were getting ready to vote for this bill, I almost exclusively got pats on the back. I mean, I think it was surprising to many people that the bill we developed, which was a tough bill with a lot of tough new policy at the border, did get adopted by the broad cross-section of the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate. And I think that's in large part because we were responding to where Democratic activists are, which is sort of endorsing the party taking the issue of border security a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, what's striking to me about this whole topic of asylum, right, is that originally the kind of pitch for path to citizenship, the activism around it, right, it was coming from sort of mixed status families, mostly Mexican American, people who've been in the country for a long time, and the asylum question is just like not actually directly relevant to that community. You're talking about different groups of people, you're talking about a different issue, and the pressure on it seemed to be coming from much narrower sort of groups of activists who I think once you struck a deal, I mean, it turned out they had no real clout or pull with much of anybody.
Well, and it is just true that the profile of those that are seeking asylum today are different, right? Because you now have these trafficking rings that exist globally. And so there are some days when you have, more Russians showing up at the Tucson sector than you have Mexicans showing up. And so it is a different profile of those who are sitting in this country waiting in line for asylum. And nothing that we're proposing doing is eliminating the ability to apply for asylum. We are simply saying that we should be adjudicating those claims in a much more expeditious manner. The way we do that is by taking the claim processing out of the immigration courts and giving it to asylum officers and expediting some of the reviews. But you still get to apply for asylum. We're just going to do it in a way that doesn't take 10 years. That feels very unfair to many Americans, and it feels very unfair to many first-generation Americans who, came to this country in a different way and who have reservations about the way in which a lot of people come into this country. The reality is, what we didn't do in our bill, which we're going to need to do, is think differently about work permits in this country, right? There are lots of people who want to come here to work, who don't necessarily want to stay here forever, but want to be here for a number of years in order to work, and then are perfectly happy to take that money and go back home. We really don't have any large-scale means to do that in our immigration system today. We've got these seasonal permits, these very temporary work permits. I think we probably are going to have to acknowledge that we would be better off to allow people to come here for 2, 3, 4 years at a time, work, not be in line for citizenship. That would maybe do the most to relieve the pressure at the border versus some of the other reforms that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you is there a sort of affirmative, positive case to be made for immigration that sort of fits with common sense principles and desire for border security? I mean, maybe it's just too hot right now, but is that where you would go? A sort of a guest worker initiative,
that's
essentially?
that's go by the book. That's 1 billion Americans, So, no, I mean, the UN says that by the end of this century, U.S. population growth will essentially be effectively zero. That is not a recipe for success as an economy. I'm not necessarily sure we're going to go back to 2% annual population growth, but we've got to have a strategy to at least be able to grow by a percentage point a year. The only way that we can do that right now is through our immigration system. And while I don't know that the American public is ready for a massive expansion of our family visa program, I think they would be willing to support something along the lines of what I was talking about, these longer term but still temporary work visas that allow people to come here and be part of our economy, fill those jobs that are right now subject of permanent help wanted posters. That seems to be the kind of political compromise that we might be able to effectuate.
And part of how you would pitch that is by saying, it's like we're admitting that most of these asylum claims are bogus, essentially. That, you know, people come here because they want to work, because the American economy is a good place to get a job, and maybe we could create a way for them to do that aligns with people's other concerns.
You are wasting a lot of effort in the asylum system right now because you are adjudicating people's claims mostly who have economic reasons to come to the United States. And the refugee system is busting at the seams. So traditionally, the people who have sort of non-emergent political claims to come to the United States would have gone through the refugee system. And because we have not substantially increased the refugee system over the years, all of those claims are being pushed into the asylum system.
Fantastic. Okay, it looks like our time is wrapping up here, but thank you very much, Senator. Wise words, and I hope that they're listening.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Appreciate it.